obrazovku. Můžeme vyrazit. Ahoj lidi na internetu. Tak jo, já tady dneska budu mluvit o PowerShellu, což je takový úžasný jazyk, mnohem lepší než Unix a Bash a všechno ostatní. Ne, vážně. PowerShell je skriptovací jazyk, to je o mně. PowerShell je skriptovací jazyk, který já jsem hrozně dlouho používal a mám ho hrozně rád. A někdy před 3 rokama jsem za své aktivity v komunitě dostal Microsoft Most Valuable Professional titul, takže teďka mám spoustu věcí zadarmo, jako Visual Studio. Ale o tom to tady není. Spíš jde jenom o to, kdybyste se ohledně toho jazyka chtěli na cokoliv zeptat, tak můžete klidně napsat mě, kdy vás to třeba zaujalo. Nebo jste se to chtěli naučit, protože já osobně si myslím, že ten jazyk je hrozně zajímavý a celý ten ekosystém kolem toho nepůjde nikam pryč, protože Microsoft to tlačí do všech produktů, portuje to na Linux, portuje to na Mac OS, takže možná to bude hodně použitelný na spoustě různých platform. Já osobně si myslím, že PowerShell je skvělý a používám ho každý den. A dřív jsem ho používal mnohem víc než teď, protože ono se říká, je to jenom pro administrátory, ale není to jenom pro administrátory, ale je to hlavně pro administrátory. Takže i teďka jako developer si proto najdu nějaké využití. Například, když chci navigovat rychle mezi adresářema, což možná někdo z vás taky zná z Linuxu, kde to bylo J nebo Y, tak používám tady ten command, který se jmenuje Z, to jmenuje se zlocation a tomu pak dám kousek té cesty, do které chci jít. A on nějakou heuristikou vypočítá, kdy jsem byl naposledy kde, koukne se, s čím by se to namečovalo a přesune mě tam, kam chci jít. Což mi umožňuje strašně rychle skákat mezi adresářema, který často používám. Nemusím nikam klikat, nemusím nikam přejíždět a mačkat šipku a podobně. Prostě jenom řeknu chci sem. A když už to člověk dostane do ruky, tak je to mnohem rychlejší, než prostě šahat na myš. Můžete mít ruce pořád na klávesnici. Druhá věc, kterou tady vidíte, je tady tohle barevný, tak to je taková utilitka, která je strašně super. Když máte Git repozitáře a chcete s nima pracovat, tak se to jmenuje PoshGit. Ono to umí mnohem víc věcí, třeba to přidává IntelliSense, takže tady je to asi dost jednoduchý, napíšu, to by asi bylo Git checkout master teda. Ale když chci udělat checkout na nějaký branchi, která pochází třeba z Jiry a je hrozně populární tam dávat ty čísla těch ticketů a názvy těch ticketů a pak je to takhle dlouhý, tak je mnohem lepší prostě tam mít vyjetej seznam všech lokálních branchí, který mám, nebo všech remote branchí, který mám. A můžeme si tím člověk navigovat normálně šipkama a je to mnohem snazší, než to dělat bez toho. Někde něco píše. Potom to taky třeba používám k tomu, abych zapnul rovnou... Aha.
Aby si, že na to kouká někdo z Rumunska, když si musím většinou do angličtiny.
Od začátku?
Já si myslím, že asi plynule přejdu.
English. Let's make it quickly. Let's just go for it quickly. So PowerShell is awesome. Blah, blah, blah. Use it every day, and I use it to do this, which you already see. This is a simple command from one module that's called zlocation that allows me to jump between different directories just by specifying small part of the name, and then it calculates out my recent directories and navigates to where I want to go. The colorful part in there is a utility for Git that's called PoshGit. Posh is short for PowerShell. And it also adds IntelliSense and it enables a lot of different features. So it's much, much easier to use it from PowerShell than just from normal Unix command line. Okay? What's so funny? Then you can use it to start almost anything. So I, for example, use it to start solutions. So the II is just shortcut for invoke expression. It's an alias, so-called. And then I just say start any solution that you can find in the current directory. And usually there is just one. So it just starts one. So I don't have to type the whole name or something like that. I could use tab expansion and just say *solution, then press tab, and then it would expand and so on. But I don't need to do that. It's one more key press. That's totally unnecessary. Then I use it to, well, leverage the usefulness of implicit conversions and so on to check if it's already time to go home. So in this case, we finally see something that's already a PowerShell code. So the get date on the start, that's so-called PowerShell commandlet. And we will get into those in a while. And then we take the object that it produces, which is a normal .NET datetime object, and we expand the property time of day. That's a time span. And what we can do is that we convert a string to time span. And because on the left side we have time span and we want to remove something from it, the thing on the right side has to be time span as well. So it does the conversion for us automatically. And basically I just say, well, now it's 18:30, or maybe it was 20 o'clock or something like that. I started at 9 o'clock in the morning. What's the time? And then I just pipe it out, and this is a symbol for each. It's one of the aliases for it, and it just says expand the total hours property of that object, so I can see I'm already 12 hours at work.
But why do you make this for each? It should be just one value.
It's not, because it outputs objects. So the output object has a lot of properties: total hours, total milliseconds, hours, and so on. I'm only interested in the total hours because I want to know if it already has been 8 hours that I've been at work, or 8:30 actually. And so I just expand it. I could do without it. I could just get the whole object and just find it in there. But this enables me to highlight the pipeline and so on. We will get into more detail afterwards. And then you can also use it to print code that says stupid jokes. And this code that's totally copied from Unix, and well, at least some features we have. No, we have a lot of feature envy for Unix, and the whole thing is highly inspired by it, but it makes some things better, I think. So it's not just for small tasks, like for me, like navigating around. I only do it because I already know the stuff, and it might be much easier for you just to do it normally. But it can do much, much more. It's unifying platform, and by unifying, I will explain that in a second. Basically, this is a small sample of what you can do with PowerShell. So you can use it to manage Azure, you can use it to manage Amazon Web Services. It can build your code on Jenkins, Apair, basically any self-respecting CI tool supports PowerShell to do the builds. Then you can use it to manage Docker, and you can automate Office through it. And I don't mean just manage Office 365, but you can connect to the COM object of Office and automate what's written in there, create spreadsheets and export data and so on, which is really useful because most of the companies still run on Excel to do most of their computing. Then you can use it with Hyper-V, VMware. VMware did a lot of work to support PowerShell through their PowerShell. You can run it now on Ubuntu, on macOS, even though it's quite limited. It's limited to the language only, but you're missing all the remoting capabilities and so on. You can use it with Git, as I do. You can use it on Windows, so automate almost everything in Windows or Windows Server, because on Windows Server, most of the stuff is the core thing that you can manage with PowerShell, and then they build GUI over it, so you can still click, and then on the background, it still runs a PowerShell script. You can use it with IIS and Exchange, and to manage Exchange or to automate Exchange through Exchange Web Services, and you can leverage all of the power of Microsoft Net Framework from the language, because itself, it is written in .NET, but you can still use all the libraries that you have in .NET, and you can even use NuGet packages if you want, even though it's not very common. And you are already probably using it in Visual Studio, if you're using Visual Studio, because Visual Studio NuGet Package Manager uses PowerShell. It uses also PowerShell for a few other things like entity framework migrations. Still just a sample. The good thing about this is PowerShell kind of unifies all of the communication. So you learn the language once, and you learn how it looks, and you can then reuse it many times with many different products, and it still has the same shape, and you use the commandlets that look the same, you use the parameters that look the same. So once you learn the basics of the language, you can leverage it with lots and lots of stuff. Yeah, sounds awesome, right? Now, who doesn't like it? I do. And you probably already know the basic syntax. If you're coming from Windows, this is how you can use PowerShell to navigate around and delete files and do stuff. And if you go from Unix or Linux, this is how you can do it through all the aliases that you already know. So you can ls the directory, and you can kind of pipe to null and so on, even though the syntax is a bit different. But all of this is kind of just a lie, because PowerShell, in fact, looks like this. So we don't often use this full notation. So I don't write set location to get to directory. I use cd, as everybody does. I don't usually even specify the parameters with the dash path, because it's quite intelligent, and the designers of the language and the designers of the modules usually anticipate what you want to do. So most of the time, you don't have to specify absolutely everything. And what was I going to? You can use the piping that you already know. So well, let's go to the next example, just to get the feeling of how the language actually looks like. So first of the concepts that you would need to learn if you want to learn PowerShell is to learn what commandlet is. And we already saw that. So commandlet is a function or something like that. It can have a lot of shapes. And it's usually specified by a name, and the name starts with a verb, and then there's dash, and then there's a singular noun or some connection of nouns. So we use the get to get some values, and you can actually list all the permitted or suggested verbs in the language by saying get verb. And you will get the list of everything that you should use, and it also has a category of where you should use it. So everybody that goes to the language and wants to do something doesn't use, I don't know, retrieve instead of get, or some word like that. What would be another synonym for get? Huh? Anybody else?
Read.
Read, maybe, yeah. Read has a different, you would read from a file. But yeah, so it tries to standardize the stuff that's happening. Fetch, maybe. Yeah. And then it says use singular nouns. So everybody knows that we don't go for children item or child items or stuff like that. And then we can give it some parameters. So in this case, I can say I want the child items and I want to just the text files. Or there is a lot of parameters to every commandlet. And some of them are default. Some of them can be specified just by positioning the parameter or the argument to the right place. So if I didn't want to specify the filter, I don't really have to, because they kind of anticipated that you will do that a lot. So you don't have to specify the filter explicitly. And all of this has its own rules, and it's described somewhere in the language specification, and it's really easy to follow it. So if you learn about getChildItem and how the stuff around the parameters work, you can then use it with, I don't know, get Azure resource or stuff like that, because it will always work kind of the same. Now, pipeline. I will turn to that. If there is something that sets PowerShell aside from all the other scripting languages, it's the way the pipeline works in PowerShell. Normally on typical scripting language, you have a pipeline that pipes text. So you have one command, and then you output some text from it. It goes to the pipeline, and it goes to the next item, and it's just text. So if you have one command that does something weird and outputs it in a weird format, then you have to parse it somehow and take the information that you want. And then you pipe it to the next command in exactly the format it expects. And that's not very modular. So how PowerShell does it is that you use objects to communicate through the pipeline. So for example, if we have ABC and we pipe it through the pipeline, we don't pipe just the text, we pipe the whole string object. So we have a lot of stuff on it. In this case, it's not very useful to call toUpper on it or something like that. But if we output, for example, a process like this, so let's say we want PS idle, and here I'm using a default parameter that's name, and it will filter on it. So I get the object that describes the process, but what you see here is not what you get. What it actually does is that it, then it goes like this. Here's the object on the start, here's the object after the pipeline, and then it goes through a formatter, and that formatter formats it in some way into text. And then it goes to some kind of output. So in this case, it goes to out default and it prints it to the screen. But you could just redirect it to a file, for example, or you can format it differently, which we can do. So this would be kind of the same like calling format, let's disable that, format table, and then do out default, because that's exactly what happens there. But we can format it differently because we have the object and we format it as list. And we can even look at what the object has. So we can say get member. And we can just list all the properties it has. So now we don't have to rely on somebody giving the command that's on the left side of the pipeline and giving it parameter that can just output the ID or just output the name or just output whatever we want. We pipe the whole object and then we can work with it on the other side of the pipeline. So we can, for example, use where and filter all the stuff. I will just delete this filter so we get more items. And we can say name, like, and starts with. Okay. Let's hope we have something like that. Yeah, we do. And so we can filter based on the name. We can filter on any property that we have. And this makes the pipelining and the whole language very modular because I don't have to connect, processes and then filter on name. I can filter on whatever I want, and I don't have to terminate them afterwards or just list them or just show me what the top is. I can do whatever I want. I can, I don't know, list all the names and then turn them up and turn them down and list what consumes most of the memory and so on. And it will just look like this. I will just filter through the pipeline and look at the object and select whatever I want without any parsing whatsoever. So this is the best feature of the whole language, I think, because it's infinitely composable. Where was I? So in this case, it's another example. I'm taking all the items from the current directory recursively. I'm filtering them down just to files because that's pretty useful case. And then I'm just taking the items that are older than 30 days. I don't know. How would I do that in Unix?
Yeah, not about half of the characters of this.
Really? Okay, so that's pretty useful. Then we have variables as in any standard language because PowerShell is just a normal programming language, even though they call it scripting language. So if you want to store something, then you do it just like that. You use the $ to denote the name, and the name can have pretty much any character in it. And if it gives you problems, then you just put it in the curly braces, and that way you can put spaces in it or whatever. And everything is kind of implicitly typed, but the type doesn't stick with the variable. So you can store string in it. You can then store integer in it. If you really wanted to stick with a type, you would have to go with the last example where you type the property to string, and that way you can only store strings in it. There is also a few different scopes where you can put your variables, for example, to make it available in whole script. you just specify script, colon, and D, and you save it. You usually use this inside of modules, which we will touch on later, to store the state, internal state of the module, and then you expose the functionality through the functions. Then we have some operators that look kind of unusual. So the first one is greater or equal. And there is one thing that's very important about operators, and that's the left side determines the type that will be used. So in this example where we compare true to false, we say we have a Boolean because on the right side we have a Boolean true, and we want to make sure or check if it's equal to string false. And if you convert false to Boolean, it will be true. So in this case, it will return true and not false, as you might expect. If we switched it, then we would get false, because we would say we have a string false, and then we have Boolean true converted to string. That would convert to true. And string false is not equal to string true. So
I don't understand the first case. Why it's true? One more again.
Okay. So we have true on the right side. That returns Boolean true, and then it's converted to string true. And then we have false. And because the true is on the left side, it says we will be comparing Booleans. So this must convert to Boolean. So we convert it to Boolean. And if you convert any string except for empty string, it will be true. So
okay. So it's similar to
if this is
C
for or F.
Yeah, okay. I got it. Total.
Even if it's empty, or if it's empty, then it's false, but that's the only case. So now you're comparing false to true, true to true, and it will be true. But the operators, apart from this, they are not very confusing. They just have different names. And in fact, you can make them case sensitive and not case sensitive. By default, they are not case sensitive. So the dash EQ is actually dash IEQ, insensitive EQ. And if you want to make it case sensitive, then it's dash C EQ. That's sometimes useful, especially if you do matching. Then they have a second behavior that's kind of weird. And that's if you, on the left side, you have an array, then the operator won't return true and false. It will filter on the array. So this will return, well, it says start the match. It's a regular expression. And then if it matches A or B on the start of the string, then return it. So we will get back AB and BC, but not CD. So if you want to change that, you can do that with the match, but usually you put the expected part on the left side, so you really force what's happening. So that's why you normally write, if you check for null, you write null equals to something and not the other way around. Yeah, but we can go deeper into that.
What you said.
Now that you know the basics, you can start writing functions. And the function looks almost like in JavaScript. So you start with a function keyword, then you give it some name, ideally name that's standardized. So something that starts with a verb from the approved verb list. And then you give it a singular noun, in this case, greeting. And then you can provide parameters, and you do that just by specifying the variables in the parameter list. And it can have multiple forms. This is the easiest one and most familiar. So we specify a parameter called name. At the moment, it can be specified by position. So if we just say get greeting and then specify the string, it will be bound to the name variable inside of this scope. And then we can just expand it inside of the string. And there are two types of string. You can either do double quotes. That says it's expandable string, so all the variables inside will be expanded. Or you can do normal, how is it called, single quote, apostrophe. And that way it won't be expanded. So in this case, if we specify Jakob, we will get hello Jakob. And if we put it in single quotes, we would still get hello comma, $name, exclamation mark. So that's something that might trip you up as well. And then when we have enough functions, we can bind them together into a module. Module in PowerShell is a file that has BSN1 extension. And we can have private and public functions and private and public variables, even though we don't use variables that are public that often. And then you just put all the functions in, and then you specify by export module member what you want to export from that module. So if you have a lot of internal functions and just one that's public, you would specify it like this. So at the moment, only the get greeting would be visible from that module. And then you can import that module. So you specify the path to it, and you say import module, which is one of the commandlets. Or you can use auto discovery of the module. So if you install it into some special location and you have, again, commandlets to do that and to find it for you on the internet, and it's install module logically, then it will be put in one of the directories where the modules are looked up, and you can just import it by name. So if we look at my session at the moment, I can go module and see what I already have imported. So one of them is the PorchGit tool that was in the slide, and that gives me the colorful stuff that's linked to Git. Then I have PS readline, which gives me IntelliSense inside of the command line, and that's by default installed on Windows 10. Then there's the Z location, which does the jumping between the directories that we already used. And then there's some internal management and utility stuff that they do this way so they can update it independently on Windows. But we can also look at what I have installed. So I can specify list available, and there will be, I guess, much more stuff available just by installing Windows. Yeah, this is pretty much the basics of the language. It's not very difficult. But the great thing about it is that you can discover a lot. So if you want to find a command, you can just use get command. And we already used get verb that showed us what verbs we can use. So now we can try to find it by the noun. We go, for example, for web, because we want to do something with the web. So I want to invoke web request, and I already know how it's called. But just by searching for web, we find all the stuff that we can do with web, at least with our current modules. We can just try it with net. And then we see how much stuff we can set up with net, and we can do some stuff with firewall here and so on. And so it would be nice to have some help for it. So we can do also get help, which is like man. Oh my God, request. And so this is very short because I just wanted the basic, but I can ask it for detailed. That will give me more. And I don't think this is the full. No, this is just some stub. Maybe it just didn't download, but at least there should be some examples. Nope. Yeah, that sucks. When you don't download the whole help, then you don't get much. So you would have to do update help, which will take some time, and I won't do that now. But if you try it out, do update help first, then you will get the whole help. And then we already used get member, which when we get something through the pipeline and we don't know what it is, then we can use get member to see what we actually get. So sometimes you get something that doesn't really print anything to the pipeline or to the screen, or just looks totally weird and doesn't work with your script. So you can just ask get member to tell you what you got. So I will try it with string now. And I see whatever I have on string. So most importantly, I see this is a string that you gave me, and I can either start working with it or look it up on the internet, look at the MSDN documentation and so on.
When the arrow is red, it's there is an error in the
Yeah, that's the PS read line
yeah.
thingy.
It's
Yeah, I didn't even know that's there.
You don't make mistakes.
I do, but I have PowerShell hardcore mode that resets your computer when you do mistakes. One thing to look out for in this is that when you give it an array, the pipeline by default expands the array. So internally, it puts one item by one item in the function. So now, if we had something that didn't print anything to the screen, and it was an array, and we piped it this way to the get member, we would get info about the internal objects that are in the array, not about the array itself. So usually you wouldn't do it this way. Instead, you would say, this is the input object. And then you get info exactly about the object. Maybe I can show you. So ABC, B, D, E. Now it says it's an array because we gave it to the commandlet directly. But if we switch that, the pipeline will expand it. So we should get info about the string. So it's more useful in the second case where you give it the object directly.
Which one of those two strings?
Why didn't we get two strings?
Yeah.
Because it sees the item that goes in there and doesn't print the info twice, because it's just one string.
But if you do ABC, comma 7, would you get string or integer?
No, let's see. Get both.
Okay, so we do get each member info.
Yeah, but if it's two strings, you just get info about the one type. So it gives you info for each separate type in the collection that you give it.
And if you give string number and string again, will you get 3 or
I think you will get just two. Let's see.
kind of mistake there?
Woo!
Yeah.
Yeah, it works. It's not stupid at all.
Question is if it's not too smart.
Usually it's not too smart. So where was I? Modules, discover, stuff. This one. Yeah, but we already did that. And then one thing that you might use or might not, I usually find it quite useful. This is kind of like reflection, and since we have the objects and we can look at them by get member, usually we also want to know what we can do with the stuff that we have. So in this case, for example, we see that I have integer and it has this method. Is that static? I don't know. So let's say I got this and I already saved it in some variable because I got it as an output from some other command and so on. And so if I want to work with the methods on it, it's just the last one in 64. Then I can either look it up through the get member like this in the last line, or I can just specify it without the parentheses and it will print all the overloads that I have. So that's quite useful when you get some object from, I don't know, VMware or something else, and you know that you want to call something like create something or update something, and you can do IntelliSense on it, so it will expand automatically. But then you don't know what parameters it wants. So you just don't specify the parentheses and just print the overloads. And then you are much faster to get the idea of what the method does and what it needs. Which is great thing about the whole PowerShell, that it's so self-descriptive and you can navigate it without going to Stack Overflow all the time and looking up answers and so on. Yeah, and that's the basics of the language. That's as much as you need to know to just start experimenting and have fun. Was the time? 40 minutes. Any questions?
Here. So about the piping, you said that when you pipe one output as an input to another part, you pass through objects, not like you pass two objects, right?
Mhm.
So when you create your own command, you are only prepared for some types of those objects, so you need to overload somehow, or
There
How
are
it's
two
done.
ways that you can do it. You have the parameters, and the parameter can have two different, how is it called? Oh, I can't remember it. The thing in the brackets, overtype. Huh? Do you know? The bracket thingy in C#.
Attribute.
Attribute, yeah, exactly. So you can have two different attributes over the parameter. One of them is value from pipeline, and the other one is value from pipeline by name. So the first one gives you the whole object that you will get from the pipeline, and then you have three stages basically inside of every function. The first one is begin, second one is process, and the third one is end. So you can decide if you want to process everything at once, if you want to do some preparation, or if you want to take the items one by one. And the other argument allows you to bind by name on the parameters. So for example, you have object that has property path on it, and you have a parameter that's called path on your commandlet. So it will take this property value and put it in the parameter. So it's then really easy to connect stuff like get item and remove item, because it gives you the path, it expands the property path on the object and puts it inside of the path parameter on the remove item. We can try that. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. That's not what I wanted to type. Get item, and here, and again, it should be get child item actually. So this gives you the full object, but sometimes you really don't want the full object. You just want to remove it, so you don't have to say get child item, then expand the path, then bind it to the next one, because it binds it automatically to the path of the next one. So it will be just remove item and well, force, I guess. And that way you just remove everything in the folder without doing any extra work of binding the stuff together. And it's usually quite intelligent. So it works, it just works. Does it make sense, or should I highlight it more? Basically, you can either pipe the whole object, or you can kind of expand it and bind it to the next one. Other questions?
I still don't get how pipe works on arrays or I mean collections. So either you can go over items one by one, or can you somehow work on two items at once and then another two items or something like that, without having the whole collection.
You can do that. By default, when you give the pipeline an array, it will just go one by one. But you can work with the whole array at the same time just by wrapping it in another array, or specifying it directly to the parameter of the commandlet. Or you can write something that's called steppable pipeline, where you will have the pipeline, then you will have some code, and the code will manage how the pipeline will step through the items that go in. So you can say, give me 2 items, I will process them, and then I will go to the next one. But by default, this pipeline steps 1 item at a time that you give it to enable for stuff like this, because you can pipe out, I don't know, hundreds of items, and then it will remove 1 item at a time.
Hundred of items.
Or, yeah.
I mean, when you are writing a commandlet and you want the commandlet to return an array of whatever or something, I understand that you need to create that array at once, or you can somehow do it lazily.
That depends on the way you want to do it, but by default, everything that you output from the function is at the output. So if you output just one thing, it will output just one thing. If you output 20 items, it will output an array of 20 items. So if I do function A and
if I just return ABC, then it will return ABC. If I return ABC and then on the next line, which would be the semicolon, I return BDE, it will return ABC BDE as an array.
Is it in a cycle or?
Yeah, you can output whatever you want, and it will just go to the output. We can also create an array just by specifying comma, which is an array denotation operator or whatever. And you can also do like array in array, which would look like this, or you can tell it, if what I gave you already is array, then don't add more arrays to it, just keep it one single array, which
That's
is...
much like Perl or something.
Yeah, I think the syntax is quite mesh of different languages and the concepts and so on. Other questions?
Do you think it's a good idea to use it for writing build script?
I do use it for writing build scripts, and I think it's a good idea because it's much better than VB script, much better than just writing it in batch. Not batch. And it's much easier to write the build script than in C# because this excels at working with files and consuming all that stuff. So this is probably the best choice.
Maybe I'm considering to use it for a build script and then deploy script.
Yeah, and it also has exception handling, even though I didn't show you. And also the community really embraces testing. So now we all work in a way that you write the function, you write tests for it, and so on. So it's lately it's been handled much more like a programming language than just scripting thingy for admins when you want to do something quickly and automatically.
Okay. Do you have some commandlet manager, or you have to manually stick new functionality into some Windows directory?
Yeah, there is a whole gallery, so you can just go install module and give it a name, or you can do find module, and we can look for the Kausei one. I think it's find, maybe it's search. And it looks at PowerShell gallery and looks at the modules, and you can share modules and script there. You can get it from, yeah, that's the one. You can get it from NuGet, Chocolatey, which is like a software manager for Windows, and a lot of other sources.
So PS Gallery is like Docker Hub or something like this, like.
Yeah, but it has, it's not NuGet package exactly, but it's packaged with PowerShell module code.
Nice.
Other questions? Who is starting to use PowerShell tomorrow?
Maybe we will need their brain to help us with build script and deploy script afterwards.
Yeah, sure. We
I will
can.
try Kausei maybe.
It was very funny, everyone.
We can do maybe a smart where we look at how to build a build script and actually build it. Any questions on Slack?
Do you use some sort of screen-like thing with the PowerShell? So multiple sessions in one window, switching between them and so on? Or this is totally different sort of layer?
You can have whatever client you have, because the PowerShell, well, it's a language, and then this is a PowerShell host, but you can write whatever host you want. And then it has a lot of like remoting capabilities that uses WinRM, and you can have multiple windows, and if your client allows it, then you can have like hundreds of PowerShell windows. It's really useful when you do remoting stuff on something like, I don't know, Windows Server that doesn't have the GUI, something like that. Okay, so the percent is the symbol for each. This one. come to my next Smart. It will be awesome. And bye.